in ministerial school, you spend pretty much the first year developing your personal credo, taking these principles and you are challenged to write and then defend in oral presentation a personal credo. And here's part of mine. I don't eat things named after parts of bodies. I just don't. I know a lot of what we eat is parts of bodies, but they don't call it that, you know? Things that are actually named that. I find that difficult. So I'll probably have to go and do that this week. And it'll be on you totally. Most of you know that I am what is officially called semi-retired, which means I'm busier than I've ever been. And I spend a lot of my time now, my ministry seems to be writing. I'm doing a lot of writing. Writing for Unity Magazine, writing for Silent Unity's booklets, writing for Daily Word, which is a regular job of mine, and for the website, lots of things. This week it was a Silent Unity booklet that will be their Lenten guide for 2017. And a number of ministers get involved in that. And sort of at random, different themes are assigned to different people, using the structure of Charles Fillmore's Keep a True Lent. Some of you may be familiar with that, I hope. So it's a wonderful book. And for each day of Lent, he has a focus. And so we take that focus and write something more contemporary, something more personal, whatever. But it's random. And so I had 3 words, and of course, being me, of course I put it off until the last minute. You know, waited until I absolutely had to sit down or I'd be humiliated in front of all my peers. And I wrote 3 messages. Sent them off, felt pretty good about myself. And they were actually almost 12 hours early, so that's an occasion for me. And then Spirit started doing something strange. Started bouncing these words around in my mind. And telling me that this was my theme for today. So I had to go back and look at the words again from a different perspective. And say, what are they telling me? What am I to share with Unity in the City? And I saw that the 3 words really summarize what we're here to do. I said earlier that our focus in Unity is on the nature of God, the first principle. God is all-powerful and everywhere present, all power and everywhere present. The second question is, what are we? Who am I? And the third is, what is my relationship to the divine? Which is basically a way of saying, what am I here to do? Why am I here? Now that I understand I'm here, why? Why did I sign on for this? As a spiritual being, why did this seem like a good idea at the time? And I saw that the 3 words totally define it and totally summarize the ministry of Jesus, I think. And the 3 words were, in the order that I finally found them to be, were imagination, atonement, and wholeness. Imagination, atonement, and wholeness. And I've been treating them as 3 individual things all week while I was writing, and of course I needed to. But this invitation to put them together, to shake them up like that, what is that word game you play where you throw letters out on the table? And see how they come together, was very, very exciting to me. I really felt very filled by the experience. So imagination. Charles Fillmore writes that everything that is manifest was first a mental picture and was brought into expression by this forming power of imagination. This forming power of imagination. And I think that throughout his ministry, Jesus was trying to get us to trust our imaginations, know the power we are, so that we can understand that it is by imagining that we create new possibilities. There's an entire infinite universe of spirit waiting for us to decide what we want to do with it. What do I want to create? Paying very close attention, much closer attention than we are most of the time, to the words we speak and the thoughts we choose to believe, because that becomes the experience. We don't just imagine when we deliberately choose to do it. We are using the power of imagination every time a thought comes through, every time, wouldn't that be a good idea, or, oh, I'm afraid that's going to happen. Either way, the universe says, whatever, here it is, and creates after our imagination. So the way we experience joy and abundance and love in our lives is by imagining ourselves experiencing those qualities in perfect assurance that what we imagine we create. That's why Martine's meditation is so powerful and important. Really, it could be the only reason we come together here. Well, we need the music. Because it gives us an opportunity to sit quietly, to quiet our minds, to focus our minds, and to begin to imagine new possibilities. Possibilities of love, possibilities of peace. We don't find that necessarily on the web or watching the news. They tend to be more interested in the drama of otherwise. Many years ago when I was a minister in Chicago, they had the first, I don't think they do it anymore, but it was very powerful for a while anyway, the World Day of Prayer on the day before the new year, when everybody paused at the same time, whatever the time, noon Chicago time and the 1 o'clock New York time, etc. So all around the globe, people were pausing at the same moment and affirming for peace. Well, we decided to get more elaborate with it, so we had an all-night peace vigil beforehand. We showed movies, we read, we sang, getting ready for the moment, because in Chicago it was 6 a.m. So I decided it was easier to get people to stay all night than to get them to get up and show up at 6 a.m. So, and we had a lot of people, and we had a television station, Channel 2 came and did a lot of film, interviewed me, interviewed other people, and asked me to come down and be in person on the evening news. So I went home and spent all day choosing my wardrobe, and went down to the studio ready to be the spokesman for peace. Oh, what a wonderful opportunity. And I was in the green room waiting to go on, and the stage manager came in and said, Reverend Ed, we're terribly sorry. There's a war that's broken out, and so we don't have the time for the peace. And I thought, isn't that just? Isn't that just where it comes from? Somebody, there had been a revolution somewhere, and somebody had overthrown, and they decided they had to go there with that, and so they didn't have time for the peace segment. We must make time for the peace segments, folks. We must make time for the peace. That's why the meditation is so important. And it's why blockages in the process come from the inability of mortal mind to believe in our own identity. We know who we are spiritually. Mortal mind within us doesn't buy that for a minute. That's why Jesus always said, it's your faith that matters. Faith the size of a mustard seed. When he did a healing, it was your faith has made you whole. You believed you could heal yourself, and you just healed yourself, using me as a powerful and willing channel for that to happen. But it's really dealing with mortal mind. Of course, in Miracles would call it ego. But that part of us that doesn't believe. Now, of course, Miracles, as I understand, tends to say that there's fear involved there, and there may be. But I think it's more ignorance than fear. Just chooses not to know, just believes what it has experienced, what it has heard, what it has been told by others, and chooses to live by those standards instead of backing up and allowing Spirit to infuse it. Which brings us to atonement. The traditional theological meaning of atonement, to Baptists or others, involves the reconciliation of God and humankind. Well, we have a problem with that, don't we? Because we don't believe there was ever a separation between God and humankind. How can there be? We just affirmed that God is everywhere present. How can there be places where God is not? Whether we call it hell or whether we call it people, there's God everywhere. There is no absence of God anywhere. So you might say atonement means nothing to us, but I think it does. I think once we understand that there is no separation, atonement develops a different purpose. The necessary atonement then is between our mortal minds and who we truly are. It's atoning our mortal minds, aligning, if you will, our mortal minds to Spirit. Because we're not here to surgically remove mortal mind and live in Spirit. We were living in Spirit before we came here. Mortal mind serves many useful purposes, right? It is a very helpful guide to the realities we create around us. So it's not that we want to call it evil or that we want to get rid of it, but we want to infuse it with Spirit. We want those mortal mind choices to be infused with Spirit, allowing Spirit to have a say in all of this. I mean, it sounds simple, but it's the work of a lifetime, or more than one lifetime, I think, isn't it? That process of atonement, when you find yourself stuck, stop and say, am I allowing Spirit to speak to this moment? Am I allowing Spirit to work with mortal mind? That's a very exciting concept to me. Not overcoming mortal mind or calling it evil, but simply working with it. When I was in Germany studying with Byron Katie, the image that I developed was of a file. The mortal mind is sort of a file of everything I've ever heard, experienced, learned, anything anybody has ever said to me, way back to my third grade teacher telling me just to move my mouth because I can't sing. Those three things.
No.
Oh yeah, they're all in there. They're all still in there, along with the lyrics to every rock song I've ever heard in my life. That's all in there. I can't remember the name of my next door neighbor, but I can sing you songs from the 50s. I can sing you every verse of songs from the 50s. So it's that energy of atonement, of allowing Spirit to infuse our mortal minds. So that image I started to say was of a file cabinet, and Spirit goes through that file cabinet, takes what it needs, and then returns to the realm of Spirit. So that it is terribly useful. It's absolutely essential. It's just never meant to rule things. It's never meant to be in charge. And it somehow has come to believe that it should be in charge, and that it tries to convince us of that in every way it can. And then, so we've talked about imagination and atonement, and now the next step is wholeness. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? The eye is the lamp of the body, Jesus teaches. And he doesn't say the lamp is the eyes of the body, but the eye, singular. It is that spiritual eye with which Spirit interprets everything mortal mind presents. And that's where that then is wholeness. It's a wholeness of our mind. It's that comfortable feeling you get when you meditate. You get every once in a while, even in your life, when you're dealing with, I don't know, your children or whomever, just a sense that this is spiritually right. This is not only a practical choice, this is spiritually right. Spirit is endorsing this choice. And sometimes Spirit has something else to say, and I choose not to listen. because I've decided the mortal mind choice sounds like fun, and so I'll just stick with that and ignore Spirit saying, you might want to think about that a little more. Spirit is very gentle. Oh, if I could change one thing about creation, I would make Spirit's voice loud and mortal mind quiet and. But no, mortal mind, can call up a brass band when it needs it, march around in my head. Spirit simply waits quietly for me to access it. Waits quietly for me to affirm it, to believe in it to begin with. I have to believe Spirit is there. And then once I believe Spirit is there, I have to believe it's there to work as me. It is there to work through me. It is there to allow my mortal mind to make choices that further our spiritual purpose. And what is our spiritual purpose? Well, Jesus told us about 25,000 times in his ministry. It is to create the kingdom of heaven. And he said the kingdom of heaven is within you. The kingdom of heaven is in hand. It's not in the clouds. It's not in the future. It's not after you die. It's not around the next curve in the bend. It's not going to show up if you sit here being a good boy and wait for it. You have to create it. The kingdom of heaven will happen when enough of us are making choices from Spirit through mortal mind, that we are lifting ourselves to a new level of consciousness. If we do that often enough, I think perhaps Spirit becomes a louder voice and a louder voice, and we live more in the realm of pure Spirit, still working with mortal mind. That, I think, is what Jesus meant by Christ consciousness, the kingdom of heaven, the next level of spiritual possibility. Okay, so from three random words shaken together, yeah, just, nobody chose them because they worked well together. They just chose them because my name came up. Comes a useful affirmation of the central spiritual truth that lies at the heart of Jesus' ministry, of the Bible as a whole, and indeed of a spiritual understanding all over the planet. We've been spending some time here with much divided, but still we've been moving through Hebrew Scripture since spring. And we've talked about the bridges that I teach when I'm teaching Bible as connections from one dimension to another. The first bridge is out of Eden. The second bridge is into Egypt, into a real celebration of this human experience, the height of knowledge and of the arts and everything that Egypt represented. And then, of course, when the things of the world become addictive, when we realize we are not choosing anymore, we are simply slaves. We are slaves. Then there has to be a bridge out of that consciousness into the wilderness. And the wilderness is not what we expected. We thought the other end of the bridge would be the promised land, and we'd all just relax and watch soap operas or something. I don't know. But we need to go through the wilderness, a whole generation of thoughts. Charles Fillmore called them thought people, and I've always loved that image because there's certainly a lot of thought people in my mind. A whole generation of thought people had to die because they were always looking back at Egypt saying, oh, God, we had it so good then. We remember the dates and the raisins, and I'm so sick of this manna, I could scream. Kvetching and kvetching and kvetching. And that generation had to fade out, to die off. And then a younger generation came up who didn't know Egypt. And so they had nothing to look backward to, so they looked ahead. They looked forward to new possibilities. And then that bridges into our promised land. And we handle that well for a while and not so well sometimes. That's the realm of judges. The judges come up when there's a crisis, and we seem to come up with a lot of crises. Then we decide we want a king, so we choose a king. We allow the priest to choose a king. And we say, okay, good. The king can take care of all that stuff. I'll just sit here and do my farming and read my books, whatever. But again, we become slaves again, don't we? Because the king decides he needs a castle and he needs a temple And he needs big buildings to impress the world with how important he is as a king. And who do you think is going to build all that stuff? We are. So we're pulled from our farms, we're pulled from our personal lives, and we become builders in Jerusalem, builders of the king's expressions. We get stuck there for quite a while. And this begins to become the realm of the prophets. Because there are prophets, especially first Isaiah, who are trying to tell us that we need to make new choices. We need to make different choices. If you continue to make the choices you're making, you're going to have the results you have. So we're being threatened on all sides by enemies. We need to go back to our spiritual principles. We need to go back to God. But we plunge ahead, and so there is a bridge out of our promised land, which is called exile. And then a bridge out of exile, out of an opportunity to sit and think for a while and maybe realize some of what we got wrong, some of the ways in which we had wandered off. And then a bridge back. And this bridge, I said 2 weeks ago, this bridge is different because it's unique for each one of us. We're not just a people moving like a crowd. We are individuals. It's our individual choice to come back to the kingdom, to come back to our spiritual roots, to trust the guidance that is saying the way will be easier than you think and the rewards will be greater than you can imagine. Just come back. And then we have the role of the prophets. And we may talk a little about that in 2 weeks, but basically we're moving now into the New Testament, into first the ministry of John the Baptist and then of Jesus Christ. And so we're going to spend some time in October looking at that, and then that will set us up for our, I hesitate to say the word on this beautiful September morning, but of our holiday series on, because it's coming, folks, it's coming. Our holiday series, which I call The Long Road to Christmas, based on the realization that Christmas doesn't just happen, we prepare for it. And the experience we have of Christmas depends on how well we prepare. In 2 weeks, what I'd really like to do is, because we've just crossed the last bridge, what I do here occasionally, and I haven't for a while, is have a Q&A session, a discussion, to lead a discussion about what we've been talking about the Old Testament, about any questions you may have, any ways in which you disagree with me. I'm sure Sylvia would disagree with some parts of what I've said. Sylvia was one of my teachers in ministerial school. She was not easy. She was not an easy teacher. She was a challenging teacher, but I remember what she taught because she was challenging. So that is the plan looking forward. This is the day we have at hand, and I'm going to turn it back over to our wonderful musical ministry.